The most dangerous thing an alpha can lose is not his empire, his name, or his throne. It is the family he was too proud to believe in. Rain fell over downtown Boston like the city was trying to wash its own conscience clean, turning the courthouse steps into black glass and blurring the camera flashes into silver stars. Rowan Hayes stood beneath the white stone pillars without an umbrella, his pale face calm, his tailored black suit untouched by panic, his blonde hair damp at the edges as reporters shouted his name from behind the barricades. 6 years ago, he had stood in the rain outside another set of gates with one hand over his small, trembling stomach and the other holding an ultrasound photo that no one wanted to see. Back then, he had been a young Omega lawyer with a breaking heart, a suitcase, and nowhere safe to go. Now, he was the founder and CEO of the Hayes Child Justice Foundation, the lead attorney on the biggest child welfare corruption case Massachusetts had seen in a decade, and no one in that crowd dared call him weak. Mr. Hayes, is it true Whitlock Holdings is connected to the illegal guardianship contracts? One reporter called. Rowan's gray-blue eyes lifted, steady and cold as winter light. It is true that children were treated like assets, he said, his voice carrying cleanly through the rain. And it is true that every person who profited from that will answer in court. The crowd erupted, microphones pushing forward, cameras flashing harder, but Rowan did not flinch. Beside him, his legal team held folders sealed in Navy evidence bands. Behind him, the courthouse doors glowed gold against the storm, and for one brief second, he looked less like a man leaving trial and more like a verdict given human form. Then the Blacktown car arrived. It stopped at the curb with quiet, expensive control, the kind of silence only old money could afford. Rowan did not need to see the silver W on the license plate to know who had come. His scent changed before his face did, a faint note of rain over cedar, controlled so tightly that only someone watching closely would have noticed. The rear door opened, and Damon Whitlock stepped out into the storm. 35 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, pale-skinned, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal coat that probably cost more than most people's rent. Damon carried the cold authority of a man born into locked rooms where futures were decided before anyone begged. His dark hair was swept back, his jaw clean-shaven, his silver eyes sharp enough to cut through a boardroom. 6 years had made him richer, harder, and more powerful. It had not made him easier to forget. The reporters turned instantly, sensing blood in a different kind of water. Mr. Whitlock, did your company fund the guardianship program? Are you here to deny the allegations? Do you know Mr. Hayes personally? Damon's gaze passed over them as if they were weather, but when it reached Rowan, something in him stopped. Not visibly. Damon Whitlock was trained better than that. But Rowan saw it. The smallest fracture. The briefest hesitation. The ghost of a man looking at a door he had once slammed shut and realizing someone had built a kingdom on the other side. Rowan did not move toward him. He did not lower his eyes. He did not give the past the satisfaction of seeing his hands shake. Damon climbed the steps until only 6 feet of wet stone separated them. For a moment, the noise of the press faded under the rain. 6 years ago, Damon had looked at Rowan's pregnancy papers and called them a lie. 6 years ago, he had chosen his mother's polished evidence over Rowan's shaking truth. 6 years ago, Rowan had walked away carrying 2 heartbeats and a promise that his children would never have to beg for a place in the world. Damon's voice was low when he finally spoke. Rowan. The name sounded different now, less like possession and more like regret learning how to breathe. Rowan's expression did not change. Mr. Whitlock. That formality struck harder than any accusation. Damon's eyes flickered toward the courthouse doors, then to the sealed folders in Rowan's team's hands. I need to talk to you. Rowan gave him a faint, professional smile, the kind he used on hostile witnesses right before dismantling their testimony. Then file a request through counsel. A murmur rippled through the reporters. Damon's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to pain. He took half a step forward. This is not only about the case. Rowan's smile disappeared. For me, it is always about the children. As if summoned by the words, the courthouse doors opened behind him, and 2 small boys ran out under the shelter of a security guard's umbrella. Noah and Caleb Hayes, 6 years old, pale-skinned, bright-eyed, wrapped in matching navy coats, their silver-gray eyes shining beneath messy dark blonde hair. One clutched a dinosaur backpack. The other held a folder covered in star stickers. They froze when they saw the crowd, then moved instinctively to Rowan's side, one on his left, one on his right, like they had practiced standing beside power their whole lives. Damon stopped breathing. Rowan felt the moment land. He saw Damon's eyes move from Noah's face to Caleb's, from the shape of their brows to the familiar stubborn set of their mouths, from their winter gray eyes to the faint alpha scent beginning to bloom beneath childhood sweetness. Caleb looked up at the stranger staring at them and frowned with fearless honesty. "Sir," he asked, "why are you looking at us like you lost something?" The cameras flashed. The rain kept falling. And for the first time in 6 years, Damon Whitlock looked like a man who understood exactly what rejection had cost him. The question hung in the wet air with the innocence only a child could carry and the precision only fate could sharpen. Damon Whitlock stared at Caleb as if the boy had reached into his chest and touched a wound he had not known was still open. For 1 second, no reporter moved. No one shouted. Even the rain seemed quieter against the courthouse steps. Rowan placed one hand on Caleb's shoulder and the other on Noah's, not pulling them behind him, not hiding them, only grounding them. His sons were not secrets because he was ashamed of them. They were protected because the world had already proven how cruel it could be when powerful people feared the truth. Damon's mouth parted, but nothing came out. His silver eyes moved over the boys again, and Rowan could almost hear the pieces coming together inside him, too late and too slowly. Noah tilted his head, studying Damon with the open curiosity of a child who had never been taught to fear wealth. Caleb, always the sharper one in public, stepped half an inch closer to Rowan and lifted his chin. It was such a Damon gesture that Rowan felt memory tighten around his ribs. 6 years ago, he had stood in a marble foyer that smelled of white roses, old money, and judgment. He had been 26, a young attorney working late hours at a nonprofit legal clinic, still foolish enough to believe that truth could survive inside a house like Whitlock Manor. The pregnancy had been new then, only 7 weeks, a fragile miracle confirmed in a small clinic off Commonwealth Avenue. Rowan had walked there alone after court, still wearing his Navy suit, hands trembling so hard he had dropped his keys twice before opening his apartment door. He had not been afraid of the babies. He had been afraid of the world they would be born into if Damon did not stand beside them. Back then, Damon had loved him in private with a tenderness that felt almost unbelievable from a man so feared in public. He had remembered Rowan's coffee order, warmed his hands during winter walks along the Charles River, and once drove 20 miles at midnight because Rowan mentioned craving blueberry pancakes. But love hidden behind locked doors can become another kind of silence, and Damon had never been brave enough to bring Rowan into the rooms where his family made decisions. Victoria Whitlock made sure of that. The night Rowan came to tell him, she was waiting before Damon arrived. She sat in the drawing room beneath a portrait of Damon's grandfather, a pale woman in pearls with a smile polished sharp enough to leave scars. Beside her stood Blake Mercer, Damon's trusted legal aide, holding a file stamped confidential. Victoria did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply slid photographs across the table, images of Rowan leaving a courthouse with another alpha after a custody hearing, altered just enough to turn professional distance into something suspicious. Then came the forged clinic note, the false timeline, the fabricated message claiming Rowan had planned to trap the Whitlock heir. When Damon entered, Rowan stood at once, one hand protectively covering the life inside him. He tried to speak first. He tried to tell Damon about the ultrasound, about the 2 faint heartbeats, about the way hope had terrified him more than despair. But Victoria spoke with the calm authority of a woman used to being believed. Damon listened. That was the part Rowan never forgot. Not the accusation, not the cold room, not even the way Blake avoided his eyes. It was the listening. Damon looked at the papers, then at Rowan, and chose the lie because it was easier than defying the bloodline that raised him. His voice had been quiet when he said the words that ended everything. "I do not believe that child is mine." Rowan remembered the silence afterward, the kind that changes the shape of a person forever. He had not screamed. He had not begged. He had placed the tiny ultrasound photo on the table, though Damon did not reach for it. Then he took off the silver ring Damon had given him, set it beside the photo, and walked out through the front doors into the freezing rain. He had been 7 weeks pregnant with twins, carrying 2 futures under his heart, and by morning he had already changed his phone number, resigned from his clinic, and started building a life no Whitlock could enter without permission. Now, on the courthouse steps 6 years later, Damon finally looked at the children he had refused before he knew their names. Rowan drew Noah and Caleb closer, his face calm again, his voice smooth enough for every microphone to catch. "Mr. Whitlock, my sons are tired. If your company has a legal response to today's filing, send it to my office." Damon swallowed, his composure cracking in the smallest visible line. "Rowan, please." Rowan looked at him then, not with hatred, but with something far worse for a man begging to be remembered. "Distance. You had your chance to listen 6 years ago," he said. "Today, you can start by staying out of their way." Rowan did not look back after he guided Noah and Caleb into the waiting SUV. That was a skill he had learned the hard way, not because looking back was weak, but because some people mistook one glance for an invitation. The vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, leaving Damon Whitlock standing in the rain among the flashing cameras. But Rowan's world did not follow him. Inside the quiet leather interior, Caleb pressed close to his side, while Noah stared out the tinted window, both boys unusually silent. Rowan gave them space. He had built his entire life around knowing when to explain and when to simply be present. By the time they reached the Hayes Child Justice Foundation headquarters in Back Bay, the storm had softened into a silver drizzle. The building rose 12 stories above Boylston Street, all glass, warm brick, and clean white stone, with the foundation's name etched beside the entrance in bronze letters. It was not a borrowed office, not a charity closet, not a room given to him by people who wanted to feel generous. It was his. Every floor had been funded through settlements he won, donors he vetted, and partnerships he controlled. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cedar, paper, and fresh coffee, and the walls were lined with photographs of children whose cases had changed state policy. Rowan walked through that lobby with one son holding each hand, and every staff member they passed greeted the boys by name. This was the kingdom he had built after being told he was nothing but a mistake. On the 10th floor, his private office looked out over the gray Boston skyline and the slow curve of the Charles River beyond it. Noah dropped his backpack onto the couch and climbed up beside the window, his small fingers tracing the glass. Caleb remained standing near Rowan's desk, trying very hard to look older than 6. Rowan removed his coat, hung it neatly, and loosened his tie before kneeling so he was eye level with both of them. He never spoke to his children from above when the truth was heavy. Noah turned first. "Is that man really our father by blood?" Rowan's breath moved carefully through his chest. He had prepared for this question for years, in the abstract, in therapy, in quiet midnight rehearsals while the boys slept down the hall. Still, hearing it in Noah's soft voice made the room feel smaller. "Yes," Rowan said. "By blood he is." Caleb's mouth tightened. "Did he know about us?" Rowan chose every word like evidence under oath. "He knew I was pregnant. He did not know there were 2 of you. And after what happened, I made the decision to keep you safe." Noah looked down at his shoes. Did he not want us? The question was so small that it nearly broke something Rowan had spent 6 years repairing. He reached for Noah's hand, then Caleb's. "Listen to me. You were wanted from the first moment I knew you existed. You were wanted when I was scared. You were wanted when I was alone. You were wanted when I had nothing but a rented studio apartment, 2 blankets, and a stack of law books I sold to pay medical bills. Nothing that man did 6 years ago changes that." Caleb blinked fast, angry at tears before they could fall. "But he hurt you." Rowan nodded once. He would not train his sons to excuse pain simply because it came from an alpha with a famous last name. "He did." Caleb's chin lifted. "Then he should not get to just come here." A faint, sad smile touched Rowan's mouth. "He will not." The office door opened gently after a knock, and Maria Torres, Rowan's chief of staff, stepped in with a tablet pressed to her chest. She was a beta in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair, sharp eyes, and the energy of a woman who could organize a hurricane into a filing system. "The board is waiting in conference room A," she said, then softened when she saw the boys. "Take your time." Rowan stood, but Noah caught his sleeve. "Are you going to fight him?" Rowan looked from one son to the other, seeing not Damon in their faces now, but himself. The refusal to be moved by fear, the instinct to protect what mattered. "I am going to tell the truth," he said. "That is how I fight." 10 minutes later, Rowan entered the conference room with his suit jacket back on, his expression composed, and every senior attorney in the foundation rising before he reached his chair. On the wall screen, Whitlock Holdings appeared at the center of a network of shell nonprofits, private guardianship agencies, and sealed payments routed through names designed to disappear. Rowan listened as his team briefed him, asking clean, precise questions that left no room for panic. Then Maria placed one final file in front of him. "There is more," she said quietly. 6 years ago, someone inside Whitlock paid a private lab to alter a paternity report connected to your name. The room went still. Rowan opened the file. There it was, the ghost-made paper. Dates, signatures, transfers, and Blake Mercer's initials on a document that had rewritten the beginning of his son's lives. For the first time that day, Rowan's hand paused. Not shook. Paused. Then he closed the folder and looked toward the rain-washed windows. "Prepare it for court," he said. "If Damon Whitlock wants to know what he lost, we will show him legally." Damon Whitlock did not return to his office after the courthouse. For the first time in his adult life, the glass tower bearing his family name felt too small to contain what he had just seen. His driver asked twice where he wanted to go, and Damon gave no answer until the car was already turning onto Commonwealth Avenue beneath rows of rain-dark trees. "Pull over," he said at last. The town car stopped along the curb near a small neighborhood park where children were running through puddles in bright rain boots, their laughter rising over the quiet hiss of traffic. Damon sat behind the tinted glass and watched a little boy in a blue jacket chase another child around a bench, and all he could see was Caleb's face. "Sir, why are you looking at us like you lost something?" The words would not leave him. They followed him into his bones, through every locked room of his memory, past every version of himself that had believed power could protect him from regret. 6 years ago, he had thought betrayal would feel loud. Instead, it had been silent. A file on a table. His mother's calm voice. Blake Mercer's careful expression. Rowan standing there with rain in his hair, one hand over his stomach, trying to speak while Damon chose not to hear him. At the time, Damon had told himself he was being rational. He had told himself Rowan's pain looked too rehearsed, that the documents were too precise to be false, that his mother would never fabricate something so cruel. Those excuses tasted poisonous now. He pulled out his phone and called Blake Mercer. The line rang 5 times before Blake answered, voice smooth and cautious. "Mr. Whitlock, I assume this is about the media coverage." Damon looked through the window at the park, at a father kneeling to tie his daughter's shoelace. "I want every file connected to Rowan Hayes from 6 years ago." A pause. Slight. Almost invisible. But Damon had built companies by hearing pauses. "That matter was closed years ago," Blake said. "Your mother handled most of it." "That is not what I asked." Blake inhaled softly. "Damon, I would advise caution. Hayes is building a case against the company. Anything personal could be used against you." Damon's hand tightened around the phone. "You have 1 hour." He ended the call before Blake could answer. When he finally arrived at Whitlock Tower, the lobby went quiet in the way rooms always did when an alpha of his rank entered. Employees lowered their eyes. Security straightened. Assistants stepped aside. Usually, the obedience barely registered. Today, it felt obscene. What good was being feared by strangers if his own sons looked at him like he was a question they had not asked to inherit? He took the private elevator to the top floor, where Victoria Whitlock was already waiting in his office as if she owned the air inside it. She stood beside the windows in an ivory suit, pearls at her throat, pale hair swept into a perfect twist. Boston stretched behind her in rain-softened gray, but she looked untouched by weather, time, or guilt. "You should have come directly here," she said. "The board is concerned." Damon removed his coat slowly. "Are they concerned about the case or the children?" Victoria's expression did not change, but her scent sharpened under the expensive perfume. "Do not let Rowan Hayes use those boys to manipulate you." The words landed with such practiced ease that Damon almost hated himself for recognizing them too late. Use. Manipulate. Trap. The same language, polished and repeated, until cruelty sounded like caution. He turned to face her fully. "Did you know?" Victoria lifted one brow. "Know what?" "That they were mine." For the first time, the silence between them was not controlled. It was alive. Victoria walked to the bar cart and poured water she did not drink. "You saw 2 children with similar eyes." Do not embarrass yourself. Damon's voice dropped. Answer me. She set the glass down with a soft click. I protected you. There it was. Not a confession exactly, but close enough to split the floor beneath him. Damon felt the air leave his lungs. From my own children? Victoria's gaze hardened. From an ambitious Omega who would have chained you to a scandal before you were ready to lead this family. Damon stared at the woman who had raised him to win every room and realized she had taught him to lose the only one that mattered. He came to me pregnant, he said, each word quieter than the last. And I let you make him stand alone. Victoria stepped toward him. You were young. He was inconvenient. I made the decision you were too emotional to make. Damon's phone vibrated before he could respond. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. No words. Only an image of an old lab invoice, a transfer from a Whitlock family account, and Blake Mercer's initials beside Rowan Hayes' name. Damon looked at it until the numbers blurred. Then he looked back at his mother, and the last childish part of him, the part that had still wanted her to be innocent, finally went silent. Leave my office, he said. Victoria's eyes widened, not with fear, but with insult. Damon. Leave, he repeated. Before I decide the board should hear this conversation today. She studied him for a long moment, as if measuring whether the son she had built was still obedient enough to salvage. Then she picked up her purse and walked out without another word. Damon remained standing in the center of the office, surrounded by steel, glass, and everything he had inherited. For years, he had believed the Whitlock name was a fortress. Now it looked like a cage with his mother's fingerprints on every lock. On his desk, the city lights reflected in the black surface like scattered evidence. Damon opened a new message to Rowan, typed 3 words, deleted them, typed an apology, deleted that too. Sorry was too small. Regret was too late. Instead, he called his general counsel and spoke with the voice that had once made companies fold. Suspend Blake Mercer's access immediately. Preserve every record from 6 years ago. And prepare for an independent investigation into my mother. The counsel went silent, then answered carefully. That will damage the family. Damon looked at the rain sliding down the glass and saw 2 little boys standing beside Rowan on courthouse steps, fearless because their Omega father had taught them not to bow. No, he said. It will tell the truth. The sealed evidence reached Rowan's desk before sunrise, carried in a black courier envelope and signed for by Maria Torres herself. Boston was still waking beneath a pale gray sky, the kind of morning where the city looked innocent only because the lights had not yet revealed every flaw. Rowan stood alone in his office, sleeves rolled to his forearms, coffee untouched beside him, while the first pages spread across the polished table like pieces of a life stolen by procedure. There was the altered lab request from 6 years ago, marked urgent and confidential. There was the payment routed through a Whitlock family account disguised as a consulting fee. There were Blake Mercer's initials, small and neat, beside a false paternity summary that had never been filed with any legitimate medical authority. And there, beneath it all, was the original result, the one Rowan had never seen, the one that had been buried before Damon ever had a chance to read it. Probability of biological paternity, greater than 99.9%. Rowan did not sit down. He did not cry. He had spent 6 years making sure tears were not the only language people understood from an Omega. Instead, he took one slow breath, placed the original report into a clear evidence sleeve, and wrote the time across the seal with a black marker. At 7:15, Noah and Caleb padded into the office in sneakers and school uniforms, both still sleepy, both carrying cereal bars Maria had clearly bribed them with downstairs. Caleb noticed the files first. Is that grown-up court stuff? Rowan turned the folder face down. Yes. Noah climbed into the chair near the window. Is it about him? The word him was soft, cautious. Not yet, father. Not even Mr. Whitlock. Rowan walked over and crouched in front of them. The morning light touched their pale faces and silver-gray eyes, making them look heartbreakingly young despite how much truth had already brushed their lives. Some of it is, he said. Caleb's fingers tightened around the cereal bar wrapper. Are we in trouble? Rowan's answer came immediately. Never. Adults made choices. Adults will answer for them. You are not evidence to me. You are my sons. Noah looked relieved, but Caleb kept studying him. But other people might talk about us. Rowan nodded because he would not insult them with comfort built on lies. They might. That is why I am going to control what enters the courtroom and what stays private. No one gets to use your names unless the judge allows it. No one gets your school records. No one gets your medical history. No one gets to turn you into a headline. Caleb's shoulders loosened. Noah slid off the chair and hugged Rowan around the neck. Rowan closed his eyes for 1 second, holding him with the careful strength of a man who had built walls not to keep love out, but to keep it safe inside. By 9:30, the emergency hearing was underway. The courtroom was packed, but quiet under the judge's gaze. Reporters filled the back benches. Whitlock board members sat stiffly in dark suits. Victoria Whitlock arrived last, dressed in winter white, her expression smooth enough to pass for grief from a distance. Damon sat 2 rows behind her, not beside her. Rowan noticed that before he noticed anything else. When he rose to speak, the room shifted toward him. "Your Honor," he began, voice calm. "The Foundation is submitting evidence that Whitlock Holdings was not merely negligent in its relationship with the guardianship network. We now have reason to believe senior members of the Whitlock family and their representatives manipulated legal and medical documents connected to vulnerable Omega parents and children, including records tied to my own pregnancy 6 years ago." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Victoria's face remained still, but one pearl earring trembled against her neck. Blake Mercer was not present. His empty chair at counsel table said enough. Rowan submitted the lab records, the bank transfers, the internal messages, and the chain of custody. He did not dramatize. He did not plead. He built the truth brick by brick until the room had no choice but to stand inside it. Then Damon rose. Every head turned. His attorney reached for his sleeve, but Damon stepped away. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low but clear. "Whitlock Holdings will not contest the preservation order. I am also authorizing full release of internal records to the court-appointed investigator." Victoria turned sharply. "Damon." The judge looked over her glasses. "Mrs. Whitlock, you will remain silent unless addressed." For the first time in any room Rowan had ever seen her enter, Victoria obeyed. Damon continued, and his eyes did not leave the bench because he seemed to understand he had not earned the right to look at Rowan for mercy. "I further request that Blake Mercer's access, communications, and archived files be secured immediately. I believe the court will find evidence of document falsification connected to my family's private accounts." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of a throne cracking in public. Rowan turned one page in his folder with steady fingers, but inside him something shifted, not forgiveness, not softness, only recognition. Damon had finally chosen the truth in a room where it cost him something. Victoria stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "This is a family matter," she said, her voice cold and bright with panic. Rowan looked at her then. 6 years ago, that voice had made a pregnant Omega walk into the rain alone. Today, it sounded small beneath fluorescent lights and judicial authority. "No," Rowan said, his voice carrying across the room. "It became a legal matter the moment you decided my children's bloodline was yours to erase." The judge struck the gavel once, restoring order, but no one forgot the sentence. By the time the hearing ended, the court had frozen relevant Whitlock records, ordered independent review, and referred the suspected falsifications for criminal investigation. Outside, cameras waited again. This time, Rowan walked past them without comment. Damon followed at a distance of 10 feet, close enough to be seen, far enough not to presume. At the courthouse doors, Rowan paused but did not turn around. "One truthful statement does not make you safe," he said. Damon's answer came quietly behind him. "I know." Rowan looked out at the morning sun breaking through the clouds over Boston. "Then keep proving it where no one is clapping." The story should have ended with the court order, but powerful families rarely fall in silence. By noon, Victoria Whitlock had done what people like her always did when truth became dangerous. She tried to dress cruelty as concern. A statement appeared across every major Boston outlet before Rowan had even returned to his office. It called him unstable, ambitious, and emotionally compromised. It questioned whether an Omega with a personal grudge should be allowed to lead a foundation handling vulnerable children. It did not name Noah and Caleb directly, but it said enough for the world to understand exactly where the knife was pointed. Rowan read the statement once in the back of the SUV, then locked his phone and looked out at the city. Maria, seated across from him, was already furious enough for both of them. "We can file for sanctions, defamation, and an emergency privacy order before 3 o'clock, she said. Rowan's voice was calm. "Do it." Caleb and Noah were at school, guarded by a quiet security plan they would hopefully never notice. That was the only reason Rowan allowed himself to be angry. Not loud, not reckless, just cold enough to be useful. By 2:45, they were back in court. The hearing had been moved to a larger room because of the media crush, and every seat was filled. Victoria entered surrounded by attorneys, her face pale but composed, her white suit replaced by navy, as if darker fabric could make her look more credible. Damon entered alone. That mattered. He did not sit with his mother. He sat behind Rowan's side of the room, not close enough to claim alliance, but close enough to make his choice visible. Rowan did not acknowledge him. He rose when the judge entered, then remained standing as Maria handed him the printed statement. When his turn came, he stepped to the lectern with the posture of a man who had survived humiliation and learned to make it testify. "Your Honor, less than 4 hours after this court-ordered preservation of Whitlock records, Mrs. Whitlock released a public statement designed to discredit me, intimidate my foundation, and indirectly expose 2 minor children to public speculation." Victoria's attorney stood. "Objection. The statement is protected speech." Rowan turned a page. Protected speech does not include retaliatory intimidation tied to an active investigation involving falsified medical records and child welfare contracts. The judge looked at Victoria's side. "I will hear him." Rowan placed the statement beside a packet of prior internal messages. The language used today is not new. 6 years ago, similar language was used in private communications to describe me after I reported my pregnancy to the Whitlock family. Ambitious, unstable, opportunistic, compromised. Those words were not opinions. They were tools. A quiet tension stretched across the room. Damon lowered his gaze, and for once, shame looked better on him than pride ever had. Rowan continued, voice steady. "They were used to isolate a pregnant Omega, bury a legitimate paternity result, and protect a family image at the expense of 2 unborn children. Today, the same pattern has moved from a drawing room to the press." Victoria stood suddenly. "This is absurd. I protected my son from a calculated trap." The judge's expression hardened. "Mrs. Whitlock, sit down." But Rowan did not let the moment pass. He turned toward her fully, and every camera sketch artist in the room seemed to freeze over their paper. "No, let her finish," Rowan said softly. "Let the court hear how easily she says it." Victoria's lips tightened. "You knew exactly what carrying a Whitlock heir could give you." Rowan looked at her as if she had just handed him the final exhibit. "I carried children, not leverage." The sentence moved through the room like a bell. Damon's hands closed around the edge of the bench in front of him. Victoria's face shifted, not much, but enough for Rowan to see that she understood the room was no longer hers. "And because you could not control me," Rowan said, "you tried to erase them. When that failed, you tried to shame me. When that failed, you tried to make the public afraid of me. So let me be clear. I am not afraid of you. I was not afraid when I raised 2 infants alone on 4 hours of sleep while finishing legal briefs at my kitchen table. I was not afraid when I built a foundation you now pretend to worry about. And I am certainly not afraid of a woman whose power depends on everyone else staying quiet." The judge called for order, though no one had spoken. The silence itself had become too loud. Damon stood then, slowly, and this time his voice did shake. "Your Honor, I can confirm that my mother's statement was not authorized by Whitlock Holdings. I have removed her from all communications involving the company pending board review, and I will provide sworn testimony regarding the events of 6 years ago." Victoria turned on him, her composure breaking into disbelief. "You would choose him over your own mother?" Damon looked at Rowan first, but only for a moment, as if reminding himself not to ask for gratitude. Then he faced Victoria. "I am choosing the children you tried to erase." The judge granted the emergency privacy order, restricted public discussion of the minors, ordered Victoria to cease retaliatory statements, and scheduled a formal evidentiary hearing. As the room emptied, reporters surged toward the hallway, hungry for the next headline. Rowan remained at the table, gathering his files with unhurried precision. Damon approached, but stopped several feet away. I should have said that 6 years ago, he said. Rowan did not look up. Yes, he answered. Damon absorbed it. No defense. No excuse. Rowan slid the last folder into his briefcase and finally met his eyes. Do not mistake speaking against her for standing beside me. Those are different things. Damon nodded, and the pain in his face did not move Rowan, but his silence did. Outside the courthouse, the storm had passed, leaving the pavement bright under a clean afternoon sun. Rowan walked out alone, his shadow long on the courthouse steps, while behind him, the Whitlock Empire began to understand that the Omega it had tried to bury had learned how to turn testimony into thunder. The formal evidentiary hearing began on a Thursday morning under a sky so clear it felt almost disrespectful. Boston moved outside the courthouse with its usual impatience, coffee cups in hand, traffic lights blinking, pedestrians rushing past, as if an old dynasty was not about to be dismantled one sworn statement at a time. Inside courtroom 4, every seat was filled before the judge entered. Whitlock board members occupied the left side, with faces carved from worry. Reporters lined the back row, pens ready. Rowan sat at counsel table in a dark blue suit, his expression calm, his pale hands resting beside a stack of folders arranged with surgical precision. Damon sat behind him again, not close enough to touch the life he had lost, but close enough to testify when called. Victoria Whitlock sat across the aisle, no longer surrounded by effortless power. Her pearls were gone. Her attorneys whispered constantly. Her eyes, once sharp enough to make rooms lower their voices, kept flickering toward the sealed evidence boxes stacked near the clerk's desk. Blake Mercer was brought in by federal investigators, not dramatically, not violently, just quietly, in a gray suit that looked slept in and a face drained of all professional polish. That was the first real crack in Victoria's throne. Men like Blake built their careers on appearing untouchable. Now he looked like a document that had been handled too many times. Rowan watched him take the stand and felt no satisfaction, only a clean, focused stillness. The prosecutor began with the altered paternity report, then the bank transfers, then the private emails that had turned one Omega's pregnancy into a public relations threat to be neutralized. Blake tried to soften every answer. He said he had followed instructions. He said he had believed the documents were internal risk assessments. He said Victoria had never used the exact word falsify. Rowan's attorney asked one question after another until Blake's careful language began to collapse under the weight of dates, signatures, and metadata. By 11:23, the courtroom screen displayed an email from Victoria's private account. The subject line read, "Remove the Hayes complication before Damon sees the original." No one breathed. Damon closed his eyes. Rowan kept his open. He wanted to see every second of the truth entering the room that had once been denied to him. Blake's voice cracked when he finally admitted the lab report shown to Damon 6 years ago had been altered before Damon entered the drawing room. He admitted the photographs had been manipulated. He admitted money had moved from a Whitlock family account to a private investigator, then to a shell consulting firm, then back into his own account as a bonus. Victoria's attorney objected. The judge overruled it. The prosecutor asked whether Victoria Whitlock had directed the concealment of the original paternity result. Blake looked toward Victoria, and for one final second, he seemed to hope old loyalty would save him. It did not. Yes, he said. The word was small, but it ended in empire. Victoria stood so abruptly that her chair struck the table behind her. He is lying to save himself. The judge warned her, but she kept going, her voice losing its polished edge. I did what any mother would do. I protected my son from a scandal. I protected our name. Rowan rose before his attorney could stop him. The judge looked at him for a long moment, then allowed him to speak. Rowan turned toward Victoria, and the courtroom seemed to narrow around the space between them. You did not protect your son, he said. You protected your control over him. You did not protect your name. You used it as a weapon against 2 unborn children. Victoria's face twisted with outrage. They were never supposed to exist in his life. A sound moved through the courtroom, not loud, but human, shocked and wounded. Damon stood then, pale and devastated, but steady. Do not speak about them as if they are mistakes, he said. Victoria looked at him, and for the first time, she seemed to understand he was not coming back to her side of the room. The judge ordered a recess, but the damage had already become public record. By the end of the day, Victoria Whitlock had been formally removed from the Whitlock board pending criminal investigation, her voting rights suspended, her access to family accounts frozen. Blake Mercer accepted cooperation terms and was referred for prosecution on charges tied to document falsification, fraud, and obstruction. The guardianship network investigation expanded to 3 states. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited, but Rowan did not give them triumph. He stood on the steps in the late afternoon light and said only, "Children are not scandals. Omega parents are not problems to be managed. Today was not revenge. Today was correction." Damon watched from several feet away as Rowan walked to his car. This time, he did not call his name. He had learned, finally, that remorse did not earn proximity. As Rowan reached the open door, Noah and Caleb jumped from the back seat, their school bags bouncing against their shoulders. Caleb ran into Rowan's arms first, then Noah followed, and Rowan held them both under the gold wash of sunset, as if the whole courthouse could crumble and nothing in his world would move. Damon stayed where he was, hands at his sides, silver eyes bright with everything he had no right to ask for. Noah glanced over Rowan's shoulder and saw him. For a moment, father and son looked at each other across 6 years of stolen time. Then Noah gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, not welcome, just recognition. Damon lowered his head in return, and for the first time in his life, the alpha heir of Whitlock understood that being allowed to stand at a distance was more mercy than he deserved. The first month after Victoria's fall was not a reunion. Rowan made sure of that. He did not soften the past into something easier to swallow, and he did not let Damon turn regret into a key. Everything began with boundaries, written clearly, signed by attorneys, and explained to Noah and Caleb in language they could understand. Damon would have supervised visits at the Foundation's Family Center every Saturday from 10 in the morning to noon. He would attend parental counseling with a court-approved therapist. He would not ask the boys to call him dad. He would not bring gifts worth more than $20. He would not speak badly about Victoria in front of them, no matter what she had done, because Rowan refused to raise children inside another generation of poison. Damon agreed to every condition without negotiation. That surprised the board, irritated his public relations team, and confused the society pages that had spent years describing him as a man who never accepted terms he did not write himself. But Damon was learning that love was not a merger. There was no contract clause that could force a child to trust him. On the first Saturday, he arrived 15 minutes early carrying nothing but a picture book about the solar system and a paper bag of plain blueberry muffins from a bakery near Beacon Hill. He wore jeans and a gray sweater instead of a suit, and still looked like a man trying to impersonate someone harmless. Caleb noticed immediately. "You look weird," he said from the playroom rug. Damon looked down at himself with grave seriousness. "That seems fair." Noah giggled before he could stop himself. Rowan stood near the observation window with the therapist, arms folded, face unreadable. Damon did not look at him for approval. That was the first small thing he did right. He sat on the floor 3 feet away from the boys and opened the book. "I heard you like planets." Noah glanced at Caleb, waiting. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "What is the coldest planet?" Damon answered. "Uranus is the coldest measured in the upper atmosphere, even though Neptune is farther from the sun." Caleb stared at him, offended that he was correct. "Fine," he said. "You can read page 1. So Damon read. His voice, the same voice that had once commanded boardrooms and silenced executives, became careful around the names of moons and rings and distant ice. He did not rush when Noah interrupted to explain that Saturn was better because it looked like it was wearing a fancy hat. He did not correct Caleb when he insisted that Mars was misunderstood, not boring. He listened as if the entire future depended on the boys being heard. Maybe it did. Week after week, he came back. Sometimes the visits were awkward. Sometimes Caleb refused to speak for the first 20 minutes and built towers just to knock them down with a look that dared Damon to react. Damon only helped pick up the blocks. Sometimes Noah asked questions that made the room go quiet. "Did you know our favorite color when we were babies?" Damon answered honestly. "No, I did not know anything I should have known." Noah looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Mine was yellow." Damon nodded as if receiving sacred testimony. "Thank you for telling me." Outside the playroom, Rowan watched, not unmoved, but careful. He had seen alphas perform remorse before. He had seen powerful men cry when consequences arrived, then return to cruelty when comfort was restored. Damon would not be judged by one confession, one hearing, or one soft afternoon on a rug. He would be judged by repetition, by humility when no camera watched, by whether he stayed gentle when forgiveness did not come on schedule. The real test came on a rainy Saturday in November when Damon arrived soaked, 20 minutes late, and visibly shaken after an emergency board vote that removed the final remains of Victoria's influence from Whitlock Holdings. Caleb sat at the table, arms crossed. "You said 10. Damon stood in the doorway, rainwater dripping from his coat, and every adult in the room seemed to hold their breath. 6 years ago, he might have explained his importance. He might have expected understanding because his crisis was larger. This time, he lowered himself to one knee so he was not towering over his son. "You are right," he said. "I said 10, and I was late. I am sorry. It will not happen again." Caleb studied him suspiciously. "No excuse. No excuse." Noah slid a muffin toward the empty chair. "We saved you one." But Caleb said maybe we should not. Caleb kicked him under the table. Damon took the muffin like it weighed more than gold. "I am grateful you saved it." Rowan looked away first, because the ache in his chest was not forgiveness yet, but it was no longer only grief. 3 months later, the visits moved from the foundation to a public park near the Charles River. Damon learned to push Noah on the swings without going too high, learned that Caleb pretended not to like being cheered for, but smiled when he thought no one saw, learned to carry bandages, apple slices, water bottles, and patience. One afternoon, Caleb tripped over his own shoelace and scraped his palm on the gravel. He did not cry, but his face crumpled in that stubborn, familiar way. Damon froze for one heartbeat, then looked to Rowan. "Permission first." Rowan gave a small nod. Damon knelt, opened the tiny first aid kit Rowan had made him carry, and cleaned the scrape with hands that trembled only slightly. "You are doing it wrong," Caleb muttered. "Probably," Damon said. "Teach me." Caleb sniffed, then moved Damon's thumb a quarter inch. "Like that." Damon obeyed. From the bench, Rowan watched the most powerful alpha in Boston take instruction from a 6-year-old boy with a scraped hand, and for the first time, the image did not feel impossible. It felt unfinished. 1 year passed before Rowan allowed the word family to enter the room without feeling like a threat. It did not happen all at once. Healing came in ordinary inches, in Saturday mornings that became Wednesday dinners, in school concerts where Damon sat in the back row and clapped softly, because Caleb hated attention but loved knowing someone had shown up, in parent-teacher conferences where Damon listened more than he spoke. In winter afternoons when Noah fell asleep against his shoulder during a planetarium show and Damon did not move for 45 minutes because the child looked peaceful. Victoria Whitlock's trial ended in the spring with a public conviction on fraud and obstruction charges connected to the falsified records and guardianship network. Blake Mercer lost his license, testified against the remaining shell organizations, and disappeared from every room where power was mistaken for immunity. Whitlock Holdings survived only after Damon stepped down as chief executive for 6 months, cooperated with investigators, funded an independent victims' compensation trust without attaching his name to it, and returned under a new board with strict oversight. The newspapers called it a corporate reckoning. Rowan called it the bare minimum. Damon accepted that too. He had learned that the right thing did not become noble just because it cost him. By the following October, the Hayes Foundation held its annual Family Justice Gala at the Boston Public Library, under vaulted ceilings and warm gold lights that turned the marble halls into something almost sacred. Rowan stood at the podium in a deep green suit, pale face composed, blonde hair brushed neatly back, his son sitting at the front table with Maria and their favorite teacher. Damon sat one table behind them, not hidden, not centered, simply present. Rowan spoke about children who deserved safety, parents who deserved dignity, and systems that had to answer when they failed the vulnerable. His voice was steady, but when he looked down and saw Noah grinning at him with both thumbs up, he had to pause. The room laughed gently. Caleb rolled his eyes, then gave one tiny thumb up too. After the speech, Damon found Rowan on the library balcony overlooking Copley Square. The night air was crisp, carrying the smell of rain, traffic, and autumn leaves. For a while, they stood side by side without touching. That silence would once have been full of everything they refused to say. Now it was simply quiet. Damon spoke first. I used to think forgiveness meant being let back in. Rowan looked over the city lights. And now I think it means accepting the door may stay closed and still becoming someone who would never hurt what is behind it again. Rowan turned to him then. The years had not erased what happened. Nothing could. The pregnant Omega left in the rain still existed somewhere inside him, not as a wound begging to be reopened, but as a witness to how far he had come. I do not love the man who rejected me, Rowan said. Damon nodded, his face pale but steady. I know. Rowan's voice softened, not into weakness, but into truth. But I am beginning to trust the man who stayed. Damon's eyes shone, and this time he did not reach for more than the moment offered. Inside the ballroom, music began, something slow and bright enough for children to dance badly to. Noah burst through the balcony doors first, breathless. Papa, Caleb says Mr. Damon cannot dance. Caleb appeared behind him, offended. I said he probably cannot dance. Damon looked at Rowan, waiting. Permission first, always. Rowan's mouth curved. You may defend yourself. Damon placed one hand over his heart with solemn dignity. I will try not to embarrass the family. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Everyone heard it. Family. Noah smiled first. Caleb looked at Rowan, then at Damon, then shrugged with the exaggerated mercy of a 6-year-old judge. Fine. But if you step on my shoes, you owe me ice cream. They returned to the ballroom together, not as a perfect picture, not as a rewritten past, but as something stronger because it had been chosen carefully. Damon danced terribly. Noah laughed so hard he nearly fell over. Caleb complained the entire time while refusing to let go of Damon's hand. And Rowan watched beneath the golden lights, realizing that happiness did not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it came softly, wearing small dress shoes, asking for ice cream, and teaching an alpha that love was not claimed through blood, name, or regret. It was earned in patience, protected by truth, and healed through the daily courage of staying. Years later, when people asked Rowan how a broken story became a home, he never said it was because Damon begged. He said it was because his sons were loved without condition, because justice came before reunion, because power finally bowed to responsibility, and because an Omega who once walked alone through the rain built a life so full that even forgiveness had to knock before entering.